Hey guys, this is the first part in our brand new tutorial series where we cover Python's most frequently asked questions. So you may ask me why I decided to make this series. Well, even if you're a complete beginner or intermediate in Python, I feel like these questions will really solidify your Python knowledge. Because even me, when I stumbled upon these questions, it made me think, it made me think even more, and I also got lots of benefits by going through these questions. So that's why I decided to make a series so that you guys also can reap benefits by following along this series. Okay. So I also feel like going through these questions will really challenge your existing Python knowledge and it will really help you to enrich them. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So for our first question of the day is this one. Why am I getting an unfound local error when the variable has a value? Most often, beginners get this error and it's not that obvious why this error actually happens. So, in order to understand why this actually happens, let's open Sublime Text and I have initialized a variable x over here, okay? This is a bar function which prints out the value x, okay? Now if I run this program, without any surprise, it's gonna print out the value 10, right? There is no surprise over here. It's working fine. But let me comment out this one and uncomment out this foo function. Basically, both the functions are same except we are incrementing one to the x, okay? Now, all of you, please pause the video and think for a second what value will be outputted onto the console. Whether it's going to be 10 or it's going to be 11 or it's going to throw an error. So kindly pause the video and think for a moment, and now I'm going to run this program. So we have got an unbound local error. That's our first question of the day. That is this one. Unbound local error. So what this error actually states is local variable x referenced before assignment. That means what the Python interpreter actually says to us is that you have tried to do something with the variable x. You have tried to increment a value to the x, okay? But you haven't actually assigned x to any value, okay? That's why we are throwing an error, okay? But you may say to me, I already assigned a variable over here, then why the hell does this error actually happens? So let's see what the Python docs actually say about this. Okay, so this behavior actually happens because when you make an assignment to a variable in a scope, that variable becomes local to that scope and shadows any similarly named variable. Keep that in mind. It shadows any similarly named variable in that scope. If this sentence is not that obvious to you, let me explain it with an example. Okay. Now, before, when we ran this bar function, it worked fine because we haven't done anything, like we haven't actually tried to add a new value to it, or we haven't actually changed any value, or we haven't actually assigned a new value. We just referenced it. Okay. When we reference it, we just print the value x over here. When we just do that, Python interpreter has no issues in doing that function, no issues in actually running this program, okay? But when you try to run this foo function over here, this foo one, when you try to increment the value x, okay? When we increment a value x, okay, when you do something, when you change a value, when you assign a value, okay, to a variable, the Python interpreter considers this x as a local variable. Keep this in mind. When we actually reference a variable, inside a function, the Python interpreter considers that variable as a global variable. But when we try to change a value, okay, when we try to change a value, or when we try to increment a value, when we try to assign a value to any variable, Python interpreter considers the variable as a local variable. So it only searches this x inside this foo function, okay? Even though we have mentioned x variable inside this function, inside the file as a global variable, it actually shadows it out, okay? It doesn't even see that. It only searches for the x variable inside this foo function and when it searches for that, there is no assignment of x anywhere inside the foo function. That's why this foo function actually throws an error. Okay, I hope it's so clear. Okay, so how to rectify this one? Python recommendation also says that if you use global keyword, you could actually rectify this error. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, let me just comment out this one. And uncomment out this foobar function. Basically, I have just added this global x over here. Okay, I'm gonna run this program now, and yeah, it's working fine. Okay, with the addition of the global keyword, it's working fine. How it actually works? We have explicitly mentioned that we are globalizing the variable x. So when the Python interpreter comes and sees this incrementation, it knows that the x which we are referring is this one. Okay, the x which we are referencing, which we are trying to increment, is this one, and that's why it does this incrementation and it prints out successfully. Okay, so with that in note, please try to avoid this global keyword avoid or use less frequently as much as you can, because using this global keyword is not recommended by many developers out there. It has so many caveats and so many side effects. So I hope you understood that first question. If you have any doubts in the question, please let me know through the comment section below. Let's get to our second question of the day. What are the rules for local and global variables in Python? Okay, so in Python, variables that are only referenced inside a function are implicitly global. That means, let's take a small example. Okay, now in this bar function, right, we have only referenced the variable. We haven't actually assigned it, or we haven't actually incremented, or we haven't changed any value of x. Okay, we have just referenced the x. When we do that, the Python interpreter considers this x as a global variable. Okay, but if a variable is assigned a value anywhere within the function's body, it's assumed to be a local unless explicitly declared as a global. That means when you do something like this, incrementation or assignment, okay, or assignment like this, it's considered to be as a local. When Python interpreter sees this x, okay, it considers this x as a local variable. Okay, so keep these two things in mind. When we are just referencing a variable inside a function, the Python interpreter comes and sees this and concludes that this x variable is a global variable. But when we are assigning a variable, or when we are changing the value of a variable, it concludes this x variable as a local variable, unless or until we explicitly mention that we are globalizing this x variable. Okay, if we are doing that, then this x variable will be global. Okay, but if you are not doing that, if you are just commenting out this one, then when the Python interpreter comes and sees this x, it's gonna conclude that this is actually a local variable. And yeah, I think this is the end of the video. As this is the first part of the video, I just actually want to cover some introduction and how this series is actually gonna be, and just 2 questions. But on the coming videos, we'll cover more than 2 questions. And yeah, if you have any doubts, if you have any clarifications, please let me know. And yeah, I will see you in the next video.